Welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Makbool, and as always in today's show we will be discussing important issues, giving you perspectives from all angles, trying to make sure that you get a complete picture of what is going on in the world. In today's show we will be talking about two important topics. One, of course, the situation in Afghanistan, and we want to take a look at the situation as to how it came about, what is evolving in Afghanistan and how we see the future, and also the role that important countries like the United States have to play in this regard. We will also take a step back and review what sort of role the US had played earlier, what it was supposed to do, specifically with reference to Zalmay Khalilzad, who has also recently made a statement of how that the US did not understand Afghanistan after 2 decades of spending time in that country. And of course, what responsibilities were actually in fact on Zalmay Khalilzad, whether or not any scrutiny has taken place, whether or not there is any accountability on the United States of what has been done. Did they actually even have a plan of executing any sort of a deal that they were trying to agree upon? Is there any sort of substance in them putting all the blame on Ashraf Ghani? Do they not hold any responsibility on the evolving situation in Afghanistan with specific regards to their withdrawal and, of course, the resulting chaos that has taken over in Afghanistan and now the humanitarian crisis that the people of the country are facing? So we'll try and get a real picture of what has happened in Afghanistan and what sort of a future do we see. And we will also be taking a look again at the situation in India, the extreme situation that the people of the country are facing, the minorities, especially the Muslims, who are facing extremism and violence. We've seen violence in Tripura in India as well in the last month, and in the aftermath of which two lawyers who are part of the investigation team of the violence were also, the charges were also pressed against them. And that, of course, points towards the larger fact that whether or not there is any transparency, justice, or accountability in India, and how India is trying to curb all sorts of freedom of expression and transparency in the country, with more arrests on people as well who are posting on social media and putting that under the umbrella of targeting and spreading hate or any sort of a crime against the state. How India is actually trying to sabotage the lives of the people, especially the Muslims in the country, with so many of its policies and acts that are against them. We'll take a look at that and then, of course, take an expert opinion on that as well. So now, starting off with the first topic of the discussion, of course, is Afghanistan. We've also been joined by two very esteemed guests on the show today. We have joined by Afghan affairs expert Tariq Farhadi. Thank you very much for joining us. We've also been joined by senior analyst Michael Kugelman. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us in tonight's show. And as always, we also have Mr. Farooq Batafi and Raja Faisal in the show. Thank you for being with us again. I'll start off, of course, with the Afghan affairs expert, Mr. Tariq Farhadi. Considering the situation in Afghanistan and the fact that we have statements coming from the US side saying that Zalmay Khalilzad has talked about how they did not understand India. He was also part of a recent interview on Face the Nation, where he talked about how, in fact, the blame goes to Ashraf Ghani and his escape from the country, which resulted in the chaos. Can that really be said from a country who has spurred 2 decades of war in Afghanistan?
Greetings. So it's Khalilzad has come under pressure recently in Afghanistan because people perceive his role in what has happened in Afghanistan as a negative role. The reality is that the US made the same mistake the Taliban are doing now. They excluded the Taliban from the new ruling order in 2001. In December of 2001, Donald Rumsfeld declined to make peace with Taliban after the Taliban were totally defeated. And the Taliban are making the same mistake now. They are running an exclusive government and they decline to give participation to others in this new government, and it will take the time will take, but ruling alone doesn't work in a country like Afghanistan. So basically, yes, Khalilzad was a player at the beginning. But if we see the U.S. involvement in Afghanistan as a building of 20 stories for the 20 years they have been there, Khalilzad has been absent between 2009 and 2017 during the Barack Obama years, where important decisions happened also about Afghanistan, such as increasing the troop numbers to over 100,000, putting a lot of pressure on the Taliban, but also on the rural areas in Afghanistan where people sort of separated mentally from the government in place. There was so much pressure of the foreign boot in Afghanistan during the Obama years. But Obama essentially wanted to get out of Afghanistan as well because he authorized the opening of the Taliban office in Qatar in 2013. The US has wanted for some time to leave Afghanistan, and maybe it hasn't really tried to understand Afghanistan. But this is how much we can say about history today, yes.
Right, but perhaps Zalmay Khalilzad was responsible for two major tasks of the country, which of course included securing a peace deal and then ensuring a timely and orderly withdrawal of the US troops. And at the end of the day, right before the US withdrawal, it was a lot of responsibility on this person, but there doesn't seem to be any real sort of scrutiny on whether or not these tasks were achieved, what is the aftermath of that, any sort of taking an in-depth look as to what went wrong or what the US could have done better. Mr. Michael, I would like your take on that.
Well, I think that Ambassador Khalilzad was in a really tough spot. He was brought in to do what President Trump had asked him to do, and that was to get a deal, any deal, with the Taliban to give the U.S. political cover for a withdrawal. And that essentially meant negotiating a deal with the Taliban that would allow U.S. forces to leave and to not have the Taliban fighting them and firing at them as they left. Of course, there are other elements of the deal as well, but that's basically what it came down to. So I do think that Ambassador Khalilzad has become a bit of a scapegoat for U.S. failures in Afghanistan, of which there are many. That this is a diplomat who was working for his boss and doing what his boss expected him to do, and he got the deal, and it was a very bad deal in my view. It was a very flawed deal. But at the end of the day, Khalilzad got what his boss asked him to get. Now, in terms of the broader question about what went wrong and all of that, certainly I think that for the U.S., one of the biggest mistakes was not developing a clear strategy to guide the U.S. presence in Afghanistan. After it achieved its initial goals very early on in the war, it knocked out the Al-Qaeda sanctuaries, it removed their Taliban hosts from power. After it did that, it had an opportunity to leave if it wanted to, or to try to come up with a better, more articulate strategy for why it was going to stay in Afghanistan, which it did not do. And it indeed did, the U.S. did indeed have opportunities that it did not choose to take advantage of to focus on reconciliation with the Taliban. Even going back to 2001, there were many opportunities for talks with the Taliban. But early on in the war, during the George W. Bush administration, I think that decisions were governed by emotions in many cases, which one could understand, given that the U.S. had recently experienced the 9/11 attacks. The Bush administration was not in any mood for reconciling with the Taliban. It wanted to fight the Taliban. And then you fell into the situation where the U.S. could not figure out a way to justify leaving, even though it had struggled to justify a reason for staying there. And that led to this rather ugly mission creep, so to speak, that played out over many years. Final point, the U.S. had opportunities during the Obama years to try to negotiate with the Taliban, but the Obama administration had been unwilling to get involved in any negotiation with the Taliban unless the Afghan government were a part of those negotiations. And what was different with President Trump is he really wanted to get out, he really wanted a deal, so he was willing to negotiate bilaterally with the Taliban without the Afghan government, which of course is one of the many reasons why the agreement that came out of those negotiations was flawed. But that was the difference right there. But simple answer to your question is that blame could be laid on so many different doorsteps. The U.S. doorstep, certainly the doorstep in Afghanistan, and the doorstep in Pakistan to an extent as well. So it's just a very complex, tragic war with many complex, tragic reasons for the failures therein.
Right. So if there was a lack of strategy before, does the US have a strategy in place now, or did they have a plan of execution in such a scenario, Farooq?
Right. Thank you very much, Sanam. I think I agree with both my friends when it comes to how things went on. Listening to them, I was reminded that we are still asking the wrong question. The wrong question is what happened. The right questions are two. One, who made how much profit out of the 20 years of occupation? The second very important question is how a project that was supposed to actually be anti-terrorism ended up becoming a nation-building exercise. I say this because there is, of course, something visible in the Western media and punditry's commentary. I'm particularly talking about 7 stages of grief. It seems that we still are, after shock, initial shock and denial, now we still are in the stage where we can say that it is bargaining is going on. We think that whatever has happened can be reversed. I don't think that will be possible. But regarding what Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad said, I think he is absolutely on the money. When you have spent 20 years in a country fighting one enemy or the other, and you cannot tell in your own language whether Taliban is a singular word or a plural, then instead of Kabul, you keep on referring to it as Kabul, Kabul. I think that there is some element that is already lacking, right? There are 2 or 3 very important things that one has to look at. When you talk about withdrawal, Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad is not a magician. He is not superhuman. He is a human being, and he delivered on what he was asked to do. A lot of questions actually reside in Obama administration as well, when there are 2 very important things that happened. Transition from Hamid Karzai to Ashraf Ghani. At that time, if we are going to go into counterfactuals, the question then is, had Abdullah been the president, or for that matter Hamid Karzai be the president, would he have or they have actually stopped this negotiation process or blockaded it? So there are many questions, but the right questions, the 2 I asked, are being asked by Cigar report, Afghanistan papers, and the third question that now we have to actually focus on is, after 20 years of relative peace in certain places like Kabul, where a lot of people were born and grew up, how do you actually find a solution that they are not totally lost or they don't fall through the cracks? At this moment, there seems to be a humanitarian crisis brewing up. What to do about that?
Right. Faisal, do you think that the Biden administration has a plan on the way forward?
Well, first of all, I'll take you to 2001. What happened in 2001 was, this is where the very first time we saw Zalmay Khalilzad. And by the way, Zalmay Khalilzad had an excellent diplomatic career, and he has been doing very important things for the Americans. And if we talk about the 2001 Bonn conference, he was the one who was actually overseeing it. And since the very start, I mean, it was a failure. Why? Because Taliban were not included in that. And if we look at, on the both sides during Afghan peace deal as well, the lack of the trust, there was trust deficit from the both sides, especially when the Americans, during the talks, they did talk about, containing or having Bagram air base for a while, so that they can fix the things. But from the Taliban side, Taliban did not accept that. And then there were certain issues related to it, and they could not maintain ceasefires. And that's how the Taliban, they have been pressurizing Americans to quickly get out of Afghanistan. And Pakistan, if we look at Iran, they kept on saying that this withdrawal should not be a hasty withdrawal, because both of the countries, they were the the drawbacks of the withdrawal, the hasty withdrawal. Of course, Iran and Pakistan, they were aware of it, that as previously we had to suffer, once again we will be suffering. And right now, whatever is happening in there, like I just wanted to include one more thing in the inclusive government. That's why Pakistan and Iran, they were seeking an inclusive government from Taliban in Afghanistan, but that is not taking place. So I just wanted to highlight that I do agree with Brother Tariq comment. But as Farooq has mentioned, the biggest worry for us, for Afghanistan, and the worry should be for the world as well, the humanitarian crisis that can emerge in Afghanistan, and it is very, very in coming future. Plus, there is another thing I wanted to highlight, that whatever the situations are in Afghanistan, they are taking Afghanistan to another proxy, because country is vulnerable right now, and we are seeing that incidents are taking place. One of the leaders, Hamdullah, he got killed a couple of days ago, and then there are attacks that are taking place from ISIS Khorasan. So we need to understand that ISIS Khorasan is not the enemy only of Taliban, it is the equal enemy of Americans, equal enemy of the Western powers. So Western powers, they need to play their role in Afghanistan right now.
Right, and considering the part where you talked about the Taliban forming an inclusive government or not, and this is of course something that the US also was trying to achieve, which is also what other countries were trying to achieve, and that of course has not been seen as of now. But if we were to look at how this was something that the US side was not able to negotiate or achieve before the Taliban takeover, how do we or what do we expect from different countries of the world, including the US, to do in terms of ensuring that the Taliban does form an inclusive government? How are we seeing this forward, Mr. Farhadi?
Basically, the world is very limited now. The Taliban have taken the power de facto in Kabul, and it's not even a Taliban inclusive government. A number of Taliban who were sitting in Doha and were hoping to get good positions have never been called to Kabul, and the Haqqani faction has come and taken the security ministries and has a lot of sway over the nominations of ministers and others. They have reached out to Afghans. I must say they have called me not to join the government, but they have called me what to do about the economy, what is your advice, and I have said, well, first I appreciate that you're making this call. Second, advice, someone who advises has the responsibility to give good advice and also give admonishments when it's not going well. And I have said that in order to bring stability to Afghanistan, the national reconciliation, which never happened in Afghanistan, must happen, and the people who are non-Taliban and experts must join the government. It's not important, and we are not asking for the corrupt figures of the last 20 years to join government, but in the last 20 years, lots of young people, men and women, have prepared themselves to serve the country inside Afghanistan. There are some outside Afghanistan. They can be chosen by Taliban themselves, and that way they can open the government. The challenge I am feeling is that they have to convince the hardliners that are sitting in the important posts to bring others inside the government and open the government, because then once you open the government, then it might create some other loyalty problems with other Taliban who say we fought all these times, and you bring all these guys with neckties again. What's going on here? So this is why I have coined it for them when they ask for advice. I say the national reconciliation has not taken place. You have to present this to the Taliban also, is that we have the power, we have all the power, but now we want to do national reconciliation, something that the regimes that came after September 11 never really tried to do. Or if they did something fake. They did fake elections, they did fake jirgas. Ashraf Ghani did several fake jirgas. So, national reconciliation. I don't know if my message is getting through deep enough, but I've given this message directly to Kabul and also in the Afghan media where I interview on large audience channels. I say it almost every night, and the Taliban have not cut me off the air. They tolerate me, perhaps parts of them like what I have to say.
Right, and that of course there are some encouraging steps and encouraging claims coming from the Taliban side, and we of course hope that we can get a regime which is peaceful and is good for the Afghan people. But Mr. Gugelman, give me a perspective on inclusivity over here. How much of this expectation can really be made of the Taliban? I mean, from one perspective, do we really have inclusive governments all over the world, or do we really have other nations asking other governments to form an inclusive government?
Well, that's a fair point. But you're looking at this Taliban government that's not just a matter of featuring hardline elements of the organization, but we're talking about designated terrorists here. Quite frankly, you've got an interior minister who's regarded by most countries as a terrorist, and the UN regards him as an international terrorist as well, the Haqqani network. So I think that it's unlikely that we're going to see a more inclusive government anytime soon, just because I fear that the hardliners have so much power and influence. But frankly, it's in the Taliban's interest to bring non-Taliban into the fold, technocrats, economists. I'm not trying to volunteer Chorhak for a role in the government, but people from the outside who are not Taliban, who know how to get things done, so to speak. And if the Taliban brings people into the government, it'll be in a better position to deal with these incredibly complex policy challenges that it can't do on its own. And if it's able to ease the humanitarian crisis and the economic crisis, that will allow it to better consolidate power, make it less likely that you'll have new resistance movements that are formed. In other words, the Taliban's political survival, I think, will be enhanced by having people that can get things done in the government, and that includes those that are not members of the Taliban. So I hope this is an argument that many interlocutors, whether U.S. officials or others, Pakistani officials, would make to the Taliban in discussions with them, that their interests are better served by having a more inclusive government, and not just for reputational reasons to make it look like a more moderate outfit, but for political reasons as well. So I very much hope that we will eventually see some movement to bring in some non-Taliban individuals, and indeed they don't have to be from the former government, and they wouldn't be, but those that have served in other Afghan governments, other non-Taliban Afghan governments. I really hope that we can see that. But unfortunately, at least in the immediate term, I'm not optimistic, just because you've got these leaders that are taking the most maximalist hardline position possible and are not interested in moving across the aisle, so to speak, to the more moderate elements of the Taliban and to addressing what I would assume are the preferences for more moderate Taliban, for there to be non-Taliban individuals brought into this government.
Right, and considering, of course, that the humanitarian reasons are also ever present, and Farooq, as you mentioned, the fact that the country is moving towards humanitarian crisis, but of course, at the same time, if we're expecting different countries of the world to act upon that and ensure that this crisis is averted, we have them making claims about how this is a state of urgency that the world needs to respond to. At the same time, they're not recognizing the government, and then the Taliban is not forming an inclusive government. So how do you go about in actually helping to relieve the people of their suffering?
Right. So this is actually what you call makings of a great, disaster, tragedy. At this moment, things are unfolding that way. But before I actually move forward, there are two things that were said I wanted to just chime in. Michael is a conscious man, and he was cautious when he was talking about Tariq Farhadi Sahab. I have no inhibitions in promoting him as one of the solutions, because he has advised Hamid Karzai Sahab and he's brilliant. Regarding something that Faisal earlier said about Bagram, and how Western media and politicians also kept on saying that somehow Bagram was some kind of solution when it came to the withdrawal. Bagram is 60 kilometers, around 60 kilometers away from Kabul. I don't know how they could have, when they could not even make it to Echkaya that comfortably, how could they actually plan on going to Bagram? unless you are talking about some great game, and that is neither here nor there. Regarding the situation, I totally agree with you. There is a chill in the air. Afghan Taliban have not sorted out things. At this moment, I can talk about two major fault lines. One is, of course, the foot soldiers versus the central leadership fault line, because Afghan Taliban are not a very centralized organization. And therefore, the foot soldiers think that they have been the people who have been dying all along. Why should they listen to their central leaders? The second one is the fault line between Kandhari, Taliban, and the other one, Haqqani network, because it is quite clear at this moment they are spoiling for a fight. And I tell you, for a couple of months it might not happen, but by the start of the next month, unfortunately, when Afghanistan will be in the height of winters, it is going to explode. And if that happens, perhaps they'll first sort each other out, and then there will be some hope that there can be some kind of inclusive government. But at this moment, that moment when you could have done something to form an inclusive federal government, that is past, because at that time Ashraf Ghani, his national security advisor, and his senior vice president kept on blocking the efforts to hold dialogue with Taliban, and that's how we ended up in this mess. And then Ashraf Ghani also mistreated his generals, one day actually giving them high command and next day demoting them. That is how total demoralization took place, and we know what happened next.
Right, considering all this, Faisal, and the fact that the Taliban have obviously made claims that their soil is not going to be used against any other territory, but considering the kind of threat that is present from other extremist organizations and also within the Taliban, how are they going to ensure this claim?
Well, Sana, how I see it is that right now we have an Afghanistan where all of the regional neighbors of it, including the extended neighbor Russia, they want peace to be restored and economic security to be ensured of Afghanistan. But if we look at the distant powers, I think they do not want that. They want to turn Afghanistan into a fragile state, a fragile sort of Afghanistan that has so many proxies inside. It is in their favor. How I see it, because we need to understand that there is an ongoing US-China trade war is going on, and I think it has a lot to do with that as well. And in coming years, of course, we would be seeing that the immediate neighbors would be trying their hard to restore peace in Afghanistan and to restore the economic security of the Afghan people. But if we look at the other powers, they might play as the spoilers within Afghanistan, because if Afghanistan is sort of a country where peace is restored, then of course you can't play around with the other countries in the region. But to some extent, I don't see peace coming very soon in there. And as Farooq has mentioned, that there are factions within Taliban, and in coming days, I do see that things would be getting worse in there. And then we have ISIS Khorasan as well. And then we should not be forgetting that Pakistan's TTP, they are in Afghanistan right now as well, and they are operating from there. And I don't know who's funding them, and I don't know, our neighbors on the eastern side, they are funding, or who's funding. But whoever is funding, of course there is a motive behind it, and the intentions of them spoilers are clear, that they don't want to see peace in the region, and they don't want to they want to make sure that the economic endeavors of China, Pakistan, Russia, Iran, all of these countries, they are spoiled.
Right, Mr. Farhadi, of course, you've seen Pakistan's role in the entire process, in the Afghan peace process. What sort of position do you think Pakistan should be taking in the evolving scenario?
Now, Pakistan can still do a lot, which means to invite the Taliban. Mr. Mutaki, the foreign minister, travels easily. He has been to Moscow, he has been to Doha, and he should come to Islamabad and again impressed upon that, look, this inclusive government is something that can save the situation. What I have told them is I'm trying to speak the language of the Taliban because I'm trying to see how this situation can be saved. And is that if we can form a Shura council where things could be discussed and everyone could come to this conclusion that the time has come in Afghanistan to give space and a voice to everyone, especially those who are at risk of going towards Daesh right now. If they are not happy with what Taliban are doing, some of the Taliban might walk into Daesh. In countries where people have been away from education, etc., the propensity to go for more war is more than coming and trying to open a business and get married and have a normal life. There's lots of young people that could go towards more fighting and violence in Afghanistan, and this the Taliban elders and us who want to help the country steer through the crisis, we have to solve it through a shura. We have to talk to people publicly and say, look, the time for fighting is finished. We are trying to give everyone a voice. Giving people a voice from the former government is not important. They're all gone. They are gone with money. They have no honor. Even in social media, they're fighting against each other. So that's finished. But bringing other people who can bring expertise, who can help seat the Taliban power and recuperate those vulnerable elements that could go towards Daesh and to keep the Taliban together as the factions we talked about, plus bring other people from other ethnies of Afghanistan, because yes, it's a multi-ethnic country, multilingual country, to bring some stability. I think Afghanistan needs that. This can only come out of a shura. And to your question, what Pakistan can do is to encourage the Taliban to form the shura, because look, we haven't heard from Mullah Hassan, the prime minister of Taliban, publicly in 75 days. It's time that he presided a shura for the first few hours, and then he leaves, the Muttaqi and another younger generation to do the talking with people and right. Create the glue that's necessary for this country, which is so fragile.
Right. We're out of time now. So, Mr. Michael, I will take your last comments before concluding the topic.
I think that the humanitarian crisis is the immediate, the most urgent problem. That's very clear. And I think that Pakistan, the Americans, all the other key players, the focus of any engagements with the Taliban needs to be to impress upon the Taliban. You need to get out of the way and allow the humanitarian assistance coming into the country to be delivered, to be distributed. It's important to make sure that the Taliban does not pose an obstacle to that, because that, at the end of the day, is what's most important now. I think that's really what has to be focused on the most by all the key players outside of Afghanistan.
Right. Thank you very much for being with us, Mr. Tariq Farhadi and Michael Kugelman, for joining us on the show and enlightening us with your opinion. That's all we have on the topic of Afghanistan at the moment. Before we move on to our next topic regarding India, let's look at the small package prepared by our desk.
Parishad had organized a protest rally in Tripura which led to violence and attacks on mosques as well as shops and homes of Muslims. However, Indian police have repeatedly claimed that the law and order situation in the state was absolutely normal. They also asserted that no mosque had been burned. Two lawyers who were part of a fact-finding team that visited the northeastern state to investigate the communal violence received notices from the Tripura police under the Anti-Terror Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. The police have invoked charges against the lawyers under Indian Penal Code Sections 153A and B for promoting enmity between different groups on grounds of religion, race, place of birth, residence, language, etc. Section 469, forgery for purpose of harming information. Section 503, criminal intimidation. Section 504, intentional insult with intent to provoke the breach of peace. And Section 120B, punishment for criminal conspiracy.
Well, it's no surprise what is going on in India with the minorities, especially the Muslims. It is quite apparent now as to what the Hindutva regime wants, what the ideology is, and how they're targeting Muslims. We have so many examples, and we can, of course, outline all of them. There are so many policies in place, what's going on in Kashmir, the lynching, the arrests, and of course, the now targeting of powerful Muslims as well, acts like the CIA, the NRC. There are so many things that are going on in India which point towards an obvious bias against Muslims and minorities in the country. And now the violence that we've seen last month, specifically in Tripura, and in the aftermath of which the two lawyers were also pressed charges against when they were part of an investigation team, all point towards the fact that India is trying to curb any expression that is against the Hindu first ideology that it's trying to propagate. Now, of course, considering all of this, we want to be able to see what it is, the future is for the minorities in India, how India can just escape about these actions without any sort of consequence, and what the extent is of the Modi's regime. Farooq, I'd start with you and then move on to Faisal. If I were to ask you the Modi's regime's extent as to how much it's going to go ahead without any sort of accountability or consequence by the larger world, what would be your answer to that? Will the world not respond to any of the actions that are going on in India?
Right, and that is a very important and very good question. The point or simple, humble submission that I have to make here is that regarding how India has been doing or actually handling these things, India is a powerful country, influential as well, and that then it has a very strong diaspora that actually works in tandem with Indian government. So what is happening right now is one by one RSS government or Modi government has dismantled all the institutions that could have brought about any kind of correction in India. I'm talking about the Supreme Court, the way it was gagged, the way Parliament has become a mere rubber stamp, the way all media organizations, thanks to Adani's and Ambani's and a few business partners of the Modi government, actually are controlling all the media in India. At this moment, I don't see a reset from within India. And when you talk about India's influence abroad, then you realize something very interesting. We used to say in the past that regarding Israel, if you say something or if Israel does something wrong, it is not reported on international media. Ergo, Israel has influence on the international media. But astoundingly, Israel is no longer the blind spot of international media. Whenever something strange happens in Palestine or Israel, it is reported. But when you talk about the kind of madness that is spread in India right now, there is a chill. It is India's influence has a chilling effect. There was a television series called Quantico, and it was basically had a Indian lead, and it only showed one aspect, that there can be saffron terrorists. And do you know that a ABC series was cancelled within no time? So India has that kind of influence. When you talk about RSS and Modi's own agenda, I mean, the second head or founder head of RSS, MS Golwalkar, has written a book called We or Our Nationhood Defined, and in that he says that Nazis are a great idea. And like Nazis did to the Jewish people in Germany, we should be treating the Indian minorities in the same way, either convert and become the second-rate citizens of a lower caste, or then have no rights and be prepared to be expelled anytime.
Right.
This is direct quote. When you have that kind of a worldview sitting in a country and everybody is hunky-dory, everyone is comfortable with that, I think India has lost the battle already.
Right. Let me include in the discussion Councillor Mubashir Chaudhry, who has joined us. He's a human rights activist, also the President, International Peace and Prosperity Mission. Thank you very much for joining us on the show. My earlier question to Farooq was regarding the world's response to India's actions. We also know that recently, earlier this year, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom has again recommended that India be put on a blacklist for the second year in a row. It has also recommended Antony Blinken for sanctions against India. Such actions have been recommended before as well, but none have been taken at the moment. Considering all of this, that the world does really know what is going on in India. How can it be that the US or other important countries of the world, despite its own recommendations, have not really acted on them?
Thank you very much, Sana, for having me. When we talk about international world, obviously, international world has seen the India, prosperous India before. International world have seen how India grown like after the independence. And then this Modi government came. Obviously, at this point of time, if you see that era, that area, like where India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, so international establishment do need a presence in there. So I believe like their interest is much more important than the human rights. And that is the particular reason India has not been pressed the way it should have been.
What is the antidote to that? How can the international community and the public opinion at large sort of gain that momentum that is required for such actions to be taken?
I think important is lobbying. So when we talk about the Indian diaspora, when we talk about the lobby authorities, is so much powerful. To be honest, like they change the stance in a way. So it totally changed the picture. So even if we see it when it comes to politics, for example, I talk about Labour Party, for example, Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the Labour Party. He was very vocal about human rights and all this. The whole Indian lobby stand against him. And eventually you can see like, he backstepped and all that. I believe the human rights activists needs to come forward. The organizations working for humanity needs to come forward. The international media needs to play its part as well. And what is happening on the ground needs to be shown in the real world. So the problem with the media is like, obviously, they do not show the real picture. And the reality can be seen sometimes through the social media. And I believe like, the international diaspora, where they come from, whichever country, so they need to play their part. And more important is, I believe the Indians needs to play a part, because the people who will be affected eventually is the Indian. Doesn't matter if it's a Hindu, doesn't matter if it's a Sikh, Christian, Muslim. Because India's identity is losing. India was a secular state. India was prosperous because of being a secular state. And with this Hindutva ideology, with this RSS ideology, India is losing its identity, the way it's been made and the way it's been succeeded in the international world. And it is a famous quote like that.
Yes. Right, of course. I understand that the Indians, of course, are facing a sort of dilemma, because it's almost blasphemous to say anything against Modi's regime or Hindu first ideology over there. We've also seen that on the crackdown on social media posts regarding the recent violence in Tripura as well. But I do not see the kind of scrutiny from the international community regarding the curbs on freedom of expression and media within India. I mean, we've seen our own Prime Minister facing quite tough questions regarding that, but none of that came towards the Indian regime. Faisal?
Yeah, first of all, it takes me to, straight away, it takes me to, there's an Urdu verse. I only know the first line. Second one, maybe Farooq Bhai, he can enlighten me on that. Chali hai rasm ke koi na sar utha ke chale. So this is what is happening in India right now. We are seeing the examples that lawyers and people like Virat Kohli and whoever from the Bollywood side, from the cricket side, from their fraternity in the law sector or judiciary sector, whoever talks in the favor of the minorities, he gets subjected to slurs, he gets subjected to the law, UAPA we are talking about. So this law actually considers everything which can be considered as truth, which can be considered as, standing up for the minorities, standing up for the weaker. It is considered in today's India as unlawful activity, and this is what is going on. The recent example is of Tripura, where I think 3.8 to 4 million Muslims are living in there in Tripura, and in total they have 150 mosques, and 17 mosques out of them they've been torched, they've been vandalized, and there were several shops, businesses of the Muslims that were subjected to vandalism by Vishwa Hindu Parishad plus Bajrang Dal. They've been on the roads, they've been rampaging everything that belonged to Muslims. This is what is going on, and here we had two sane people coming forward and calling bad as bad, calling evil as evil, but they are subjected to getting booked under these UAPAs. And I think in today's India this is what is going on. But if we look at the past, we had examples. Babri Masjid is one of the examples. Then we had Makkah Masjid blast in Hyderabad. That took place. And if we look at the culprits, culprits were freed after a sort of made up judicial system.
Colonel Farokh is back in army.
Exactly. And this is what was going on. Plus, there were churches that were torched. Then
absolutely, the situation is pretty bad.
We had several examples from the past.
We're almost out of time, Faisal, but before that, Farokh, would you like to add something?
Yeah, just two things, because you asked how to actually fix this situation. I believe that India's good part, the people who believed in India's constitution, especially its preamble, have not gone away. They are there. And when you talk about India's diaspora, there are people who realize that if they support this in India, that will they get in America or anywhere else as well. So it is important to pin hopes on them, contact them, and keep on reminding them how idea of India is going to pieces under Narendra Modi.
Right. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you, Councillor Mubashir, for joining us. And of course, hope is all we have, and we all hope for peace, both in India and in Pakistan and Afghanistan, the world over. Of course, we want the humanitarian suffering to end, which is what we all need to work for. But whether or not that is in the minds of all of the countries in the world is still a big question mark. But that is the hope. So on that note, that's all we have for now. Thank you so much for watching the debate. We'll be back on Monday at 9 p.m.